Hi everyone, it's Jules from Tarot Adventures with Jules. I am here this evening to talk with the fabulous Charlie Claire Burgess. They are the creator of the Fifth Spirit Tarot, which is now out in mass market edition after an indie release a couple of years ago. I am just going to do a little request to ask Charlie to join. There we go. You should be good to go. Yeah, so the mass market edition just came out last month, which is so exciting. Oh my goodness, Charlie, hi, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. Look
Hey,
what I'm
Jules.
wearing.
Oh, oh
I
my
love it
gosh.
so much. Oh my goodness, this is like the coziest,
It
comfiest
looks
sweatshirt I have ever
amazing.
owned, and I've been wearing it not quite nonstop because, you can't, yeah, I gotta rotate a little bit, but like honestly, it's so fabulous. Isn't this like, I think you mentioned this is like an oxblood red, something super special like that. I
Yeah.
love it because I was like, do I do black and white? Do I do, but I had to do this color. I mean, this is like a sunset. It's just like sparks so much joy.
Oh, yay. I'm so glad that
That's so
happened.
great. Yeah, and thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited to chat with you again about Mass Market Edition. So exciting. And you have so many amazing things in the works too. So I'd like to get to that as well. Um, yeah, so I thought I would start by asking you what the process of, I don't know if translating the right word, transforming, I guess, your wonderful indie first edition into a Hay House mass market spectacular. What was that process like for you?
I mean, I, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here talking with you again. It feels like a full
Yes.
circle, like 2021 when we had one of these for the first
Yes.
time with the indie edition, and then to now with the market edition. It feels so good to be talking with you again. Um, yeah, it was wild. I never thought that this spirit
Yeah.
would be anything but indie, just because I don't know, like I didn't even dare imagine that like, traditional publishing would be a thing that would
Yeah.
work for me, or that publishers would want this like weird
Yeah.
indie queer like deck, you know, that's like messing with like gender norms in the tarot, and made by somebody who's like a first time artist who had never drawn before. It was like out of my
Yeah.
wildest dreams. I never thought that it could happen. And I wasn't planning on doing it, but when I was submitting my book, Radical
Oh my
Tarot,
goodness.
to publishers, all the publishers who were interested in the book were also interested
Cool.
in the deck. Um, yeah, and so my agent and I were like, all right, I mean, it doesn't hurt to like see
Yeah.
how it would be, talk to some folks, like see what it's like. And I was really surprised. Like I ended up going with it. I mean, I think it's because my at Hay House, Anna Cooperberg, is somebody who I just
Yeah.
really trust, and really think that
Yeah.
she gets it,
That's so
you
important.
know? Something
Yeah.
with traditional publishing was just like, would I was afraid of big publishers trying to
Yeah.
like water down
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do with spirit, and
Hmm.
also with radical tarot, because you know when I put
Yeah.
radical in a book title, like
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
can't, you know, I can't call a book that and then have it be like, lukewarm, like
Yeah.
tarot or something. But yeah, I found an editor that I really trust, and she's done a wonderful
Oh,
job with both of
so
these.
exciting.
Um, and I got to
Mhm.
be still in charge basically of Fifth Spirit. Like I wasn't sure how that would work and how much
Yeah.
creative control I would have, and I don't know if my experience is like a usual example or not when it comes to traditional publishing with decks. I imagine that if I had come in and like pitched a deck to publishers, a deck that wasn't already like a thing and already created, then I might not have had as much like creative control, but I'm just not sure. I still had like a ton of creative control with this. I got to like, you know, choose the card that was going to go on the front of the deck. I got to be involved in all of the choices for like, you know, what the box was going to look like and what it was going to say, you know, on the inside.
This quote, I adore this quote. It perfectly encapsulates this deck and how it shows up in the world and like what it can do for you. Like I think I've mentioned to you a few times, like this deck and your incredible Fifth Spirit Tarot Guide, like it taught me so much, not just about tarot, but about myself, and like opened up my mind on this whole wonderful world without binaries where you can be so many different things all at once. And it was so liberating and so magical. And I just, when I opened up this gorgeous deck and I saw the quote there, I was just like, oh, I just had this whole moment where I was so excited because I think on the indie deck, I think it's on the back of the box. Yeah. And then here it's like inside. It was just such a nice little discovery and so wonderful. And I'm so glad that you had such a great experience. And I think to me, it always has felt like you have to have that editor that you trust. And I think, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I got from that is that you were in a unique position where you're like, yeah, you could take it if you're going to do it justice. But if you're not, then I'll just keep it to myself, you know, like it's already a thing. It's already out there, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was my biggest thing with transferring from being, you know, self-publishing the deck to traditional publishing it, was that I wanted to make sure that like the integrity of the deck and what I wanted to do and like the message that I wanted to get across was still going to be there and was even going to be like amplified more, you know. And I think
Absolutely. Well, and I was so excited I did a side-by-side flip-through comparison, partly because I thought it would be exciting and fun, and I love doing them, but also I was so curious to see when the decks are side-by-side, like what are the differences, right? So I noticed that the hue of the deck is a little bit lighter in the mass market edition. The deck is like the cardstock is a little bit thicker. So the pigment seems to be a little bit darker, which for some cards brings them out really beautifully. And you know, it's not like a massive difference. Like it's still opening it kind of felt like reading an old friend, right? Because I've worked so intensively with this deck, and it was so lovely to see, you know, all of these familiar images. But then there was a couple of cards that are brand new, and I wanted to ask you about that. Like this Queen of Wands from the original deck is so fabulous, but then you have this incredible drag queen in the mass market edition, and I wanted to ask you, like, what was the process like, not just for these cards, and then there's also the King of Cups, because it used to be Mr. Rogers, which is like 100% childhood nostalgia, and now it's a different figure, similar kind of background. So what was that process like of like tweaking the cards and like revamping the couple that you kind of re-envisioned for this edition? Like, what was that process like? I'm so curious.
it was really a lot of fun actually, have the opportunity to revamp a lot of the cards. So the ones that are completely new, I'll talk about in a second, but I also got to go back and with like, you know, the cards that are still the same, I got to sort of like make changes that I wanted to make from the indie edition. Like this card,
Yeah,
the whole thing shows up better, like the card the edition, that like when you're holding it you can see everything, but when you take a picture of it, it kind of like
because the
would
indie one
disappear in
is
the
a little bit
darkness.
darker, so it works, but it just brings the candelabra into focus in a really beautiful way. Yeah.
Things like that, and like making the text more visible and spelling out all of the card names, where as in the indie edition, the minor arcana, as you know, Jules just had the Roman numerals on. I got the opportunity to take feedback from just like the Roman numerals, say wands on it. I got to take feedback from people who use the deck into account. So like I heard from folks who told me that Roman numerals are hard for them, either because I've never had to learn Roman numerals because, like, apparently I'm old and
Yeah.
people don't have to do Roman numerals anymore. Um, but also
Yeah.
from people who are dyslexic and just have a hard time with Roman numerals. And I was like, that's absolutely something that that I can address and that I want to address. I changed the numbers and just made it more accessible by spelling out what
Oh,
suit it
so
is,
cute.
since I use different symbols, one, like
Yeah.
all fire themed, but it's not like the same
Yeah.
exact wand on every card. So I just wanted to make it more cool. Um, and for the cards like the Queen of Wands and like Mr. Roger, so I'll be completely honest with you. Some of those changes were because of
Okay.
using the likenesses
Yep.
of things.
Makes sense. I was wondering about that actually, if there was legalities around that, or especially with mass market, because yeah, I would think that would be more of a technical consideration. It's so funny that you say that about the Roman numerals, because like I know Roman numerals and it's okay, but like I'm not dyslexic, but I remember when Jordan sent out Sincerely the Tarot and the Fifth Spirit. I'm trying to figure. I have them all up on the wall, and I got the Six of Cups, and I inversed it to
Mm-hmm.
the four for whatever reason. Like I knew that it was the six, but like I totally swapped that in my brain. And so when I saw that it was written out in the new one, it's not that I can't read the Roman numerals, but it just makes it quicker, like the way that my brain is programmed or whatever. So that was like really helpful. But yeah, so who's the Queen of Wands in the indie edition?
So that was
Oh
inspired by
yeah, of
Jessica Lange.
course.
And
Of course.
yes, and and also like I could have just like tweaked things a little bit to make it look a little bit like Jessica Lange in the picture and then gotten away with it, but I was like, how did I make a whole ass queer tarot deck and not
Mm-hmm.
put a drag queen in it? And like drag is so
Oh my God,
Queen of Wands
100%.
to me, that like energy, that personality, that ability to like light up a room and engage
Yeah,
everyone and inspire people, and like that
yeah,
just so Queen of Wands. And so I felt like that was the
yeah.
perfect opportunity to not only bring in, more queer canon
Mhm.
into this queer deck, but also to really like highlight, amp up the Queen of Wandsness
100%. I was
card,
so
you
excited to see
know?
this because I'm like, that couldn't be more Queen of
Yeah.
Wands if it tried. Like, it's so
Mhm.
vibrant and spectacular and just like, look at me energy, which is so incredible. Oh, I love it. That's really cool. Yeah, and now that I see Jessica Lange, I can't unsee in this, like, it's so obvious to
Yeah,
me, and I'm
yeah.
like, oh my goodness. But like, yeah, I love that so much. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, and then there's, of course, Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers. That's like my childhood nostalgia right there. But then it's keeps the energy of it here, and it's like, yeah, I just love how like contemplative, and there's like the cup of a warm, cozy beverage and like the sweater and the shoes. So even though it's not Mr. Rogers technically anymore, it still has that comforting energy about it, right? Which is so great.
It's got
Yes.
that homage for like people
Mhm.
who knew the indie deck would still be able to Mr. Rogers ness and keep the bench that,
Yeah.
a bit from
Yes.
like
I
Mr.
love
Rogers.
that.
So like, you can't be more King of Cups than Mr. Rogers. So I want to keep that homage to Fred Rogers in it, because of that, like just the way that he taught
Mhm.
kids to feel their emotions, and that it was okay to feel your emotions and to be kind to each other, and imagination even for adults, that's just so like I think of kings as leaders and as leadership,
Mhm.
and as advocates, um, and I just like Mr. Rogers and Mr.
Uh,
Rogers' Neighborhood just like hits that very cupsy, um, emotion, kindness,
mhm.
imagination,
Yeah.
like a
It's like
all.
empathetic
So
mentorship. When I
yeah.
think of the Kings, I often think of the word mentorship, right? Someone who's got lived experience that they can then share in their community, bring people together, you know, create from a place of kindness and empathy and compassion, especially for this king. And that just like, oh, you hit the nail on the head with it. It's incredible. That's amazing. I love it so much. So then also the other difference with the decks is the card backs. So what was the process like of creating that? Like they're definitely the same, you know, color palette and aesthetic, but I love that you've included, like I have the spread cloth and I love it so much. And I noticed that you have some elements from that have been incorporated into the back, which is really, really cool. So what was that process like of choosing like what it was going to look like, how you were going to arrange it, like all of that?
So it was almost exactly that, Jules. It was a desire to rope it, like bring in some of the spread cloth and a little bit original deck box into it, which, you know, was the Ouroboros thing, you know. And I was also just feeling really inspired by traditional playing card back designs. So I looked at a lot of different playing card back designs in order to model the new card back sort of off of that idea. And it also has the suits on it, and it's got the elements kind of in the corners of that design there. Like you'll see it kind of sort of wind and flames and like flora and fauna. Like you've got like all of the elements sort of represented around that border. And I didn't have to change the card back. I wanted the two editions to look distinct, you know, to have, you know, a little bit more a visible difference, since so many of the cards remained true to the indie edition. I personally like it when deck creators make multiple editions and they each have different backgrounds.
No, I love
that's just fun.
Because I mean, sometimes there's mass market editions that come out and they're like a carbon copy of the indie deck with maybe slight differences in the cardstock. But I love that each iteration of this deck is its own thing. Do you know what I mean? It's comforting, it's familiar. You've got so many of the same elements, but then there's these little things that are a little bit different. So it's really special. And like when I pick up each of the decks, they have a different feel to them, just like the weight of the cardstock and the way that they shuffle and come together, right? So it like sets it apart. But then there's that comforting familiarity as well, which is really lovely. Yeah, that's interesting that you say that about like copyright issues and representation of images of people that are out in the world, because I wonder about that, because there's decks that are out there, like I'm assuming that all the Disney decks and like the Stranger Things decks and all of those things, there's probably, because they're such large issue, there's probably some kind of agreement in place or whatever. But every so often I'll see like an indie deck that comes out, like there was a really cute Schitt's Creek one, and I love Schitt's Creek, but I didn't go for it because I was like, it's unofficial. So are the creators of this entity getting compensated for the images of their work that are being put out, right? Like I really debate about that with myself, because as much as I love it, I'm just like, yeah, it's an interesting question, right? So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The truth is, I think that with indie decks, like you can get away with that when you're doing something like small and independent most of the time, you know. I'm not a professional.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
But and you can get permission. You just have to get like, you know, permission from the person or the person's estate in order to get permission to use their image and whatever. Done that, but I didn't like. I don't know. I was like, I don't know if I want to send like a letter to Fred Rogers' estate asking if I can put him in a tarot deck. Like,
yeah,
you know, maybe they would have been like, yes, absolutely. But
like,
I don't know.
If it said no,
like,
it would have been kind of crushing on some level. Do you know what I mean? Like, not crushing, but like disappointing, right? Like, yeah, I 100% get that. And they very well would have likely said yes, right? But it's just like, do I ask? Do I God, like it's that whole debate, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask too about the guidebooks because the guidebook for the original
Yeah.
indie, like there's a couple of really amazing phrases, and you've got the different elements for each of the suits and some simple spreads and keywords, which are fantastic. And then I feel like this guidebook is almost like an in-between point with this little booklet and this, which is, I keep going on about it, but it's like worth its
Yes.
weight in gold. This is my #1 tarot reference book. I come to it constantly, whether I'm using this deck or anything else, because it's amazing. And this feels like this like happy little medium point in between, right? So how did you
Yeah.
choose kind of what you were going to include, and knowing that you have the Radical Tarot book coming out, which I think when you were doing the launch for the mass market, you'd mentioned that Radical Tarot is kind of like taking, I'm grabbing all the things, taking the Fifth Spirit tarot guide and like 2.0, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. If you like the Spirit Tarot Guide, then you're gonna love Radical Tarot. It doesn't recycle any material, so it's all new, but it expands
yeah,
on what I
yeah,
started kind of in the Fifth Spirit Tarot Guidebook, which always just like that was a guidebook that I wrote in conjunction with this tarot deck. But I think that when you read it, you can
yeah.
tell that it also wants to be like its own just book,
Oh,
just
absolutely.
period. Well, I finally got to like write that book that's just about tarot, and it's about like um, it takes some of the principles that I'm working with, like tarot
Yeah,
being essentially non-binary, like an essentially like a non-binary tool. And by non-binary, I don't mean like only non-binary people can use it. I mean that it is geared towards, or one way of looking at it is that like the
mhm,
story that it tells in major is literally one from sort of binary, bifurcated, like categorized thinking to one busting binaries, transcending binaries, synthesis, fluidity. Like
yeah,
that is the story of the major arcana. Um, and so it really like hones in on that and looks at tarot from that perspective, and a
mhm,
perspective that's about creating the future
yeah,
using tarot or with tarot alongside
yeah.
tarot instead of telling the future. Um, and so yeah, I'm really excited about it. I just turned in like the edits like
So
a week ago
exciting.
tomorrow.
That's
So it's
amazing. I love that idea. And I think it's in the Temperance card that you talk about moving from the concept of either or, and like the simple, like, oh yeah, I needed to get into balance, to like that question of yes and. And that really guides me in my practice, because it's like,
yes,
okay, if you look at things past that binary either or, whether it's gender, whether it's interpretation, then it opens up this whole wide world of it could be anything, right? And like the whole concept of taking out gender means that when you approach any of the major arcana, any of the court cards that are typically so gendered, right? You've got the Empress, you've got the Emperor, you've got certain archetypes that are fit these kind of traditional gender molds. Same with the major, well, the court cards, where it's like, you've got your page, it's typically more feminine, the knight is more masculine, the queen's more feminine. Like when you get rid of all of that, anyone can see themselves in those archetypes and those structures. And I think that's where tarot gets so exciting and so powerful, right? We all have a Queen of Cups aspect to ourselves. We all have King of Wands. We all have a Knight of Pentacles, right? There's all of these aspects are within us. And when you take away that gendered representation, that means anyone coming to tarot can see themselves in it and use it as a tool, right? Because tarot should be for everyone. Everyone should be able to see themselves represented. And I think I'm rambling now, but like I think that what makes me so excited about the fact that you have this mass market publication of the deck intact and in its integrity and entirety, there's a desire for this. There's a need for this. It's filling a much needed space. And now that it's mass market, it's also price point more accessible for people. So, you walk into any bookstore in North America, internationally, and you can see yourself. right? And that is so powerful, right?
That's wild, and that's exactly like that was the big like deciding point for me
Yeah.
in going traditional publishing, is that it would be accessible, it would be um, available. People who, you know,
Mhm.
couldn't get it before would be able to. Like I would get um, from a lot of people overseas in countries that like I just can't ship to because I can't figure out like the shipping
Yeah.
fees and taxes and like all of that stuff. And now they can, like now they can get it if they want it, and more people are seeing it. And like when I was making Fifth Spirit, it was that deck that I wish that I had
Mhm.
had when I was in high school. Um, and like it's the deck that I wish that I had had in my 20s, and I was alongside tarot, like discovering my gender, discovering my sexuality. Um, and I almost actually left. I almost stopped reading tarot a second time. I stopped reading tarot in high school, and then I almost stopped it again when I was 30, because I was looking at the cards and I had like the High Priestess, I think, and the Hierophant, and I can't remember the last card that was on the table. And I was like,
Mhm.
everything is so
Yeah.
gendered. Like, why am I using this tool that
Yeah.
functions on gender roles? You know, because what I knew of tarot at that time, everything that
Mhm.
that I read, most of what
Mhm.
was out there was so divine
Yep.
feminine, masculine, um, which functions on a core level on
Mhm.
gender roles and stereotypes, unfortunately. And I was like, how can I use this
Mhm.
tool that functions this way?
Mhm.
I love tarot, but like I
Yeah.
was really having a struggle with it. And then looking at like the cards on the table, I had like such a big like breakthrough that I like
Mhm.
cried off and on the rest of the weekend, because it just like my brain melted and I realized, oh wait, the whole point of tarot is to eliminate,
Mhm.
just decimate those assumptions and those
Yeah.
categories and those roles and norms. Um, and I think that that's what is so freaking beautiful about it. So when we look at, like you were saying, Jules, when we look at like,
Yeah.
I'm flipping through trying to find the or the Empress, but we look at these cards and we're confronted with like, oh, divine masculine or something. We have the opportunity to look at that and go, but is that really like
Mhm.
what does that mean to me? Like what
Mhm.
do I think that I know
Mhm.
about masculinity means? Um, is it
Mhm.
strength, unemotionality, rationality, blah blah blah? What does it really mean now? You know, and so that's what I wanted to visually represent in Fifth Spirit, was to like use those traditional gendered titles, but then sort
Ah,
of push back or like trouble the gender norms that we attach to those
yeah,
with queered imagery,
absolutely. This is
right?
my birth
Um,
card, and I
it,
struggle with it because I was never able to see myself in the emperor. I always thought of that as my dad, right? And that's like, yeah, no.
mm-hmm.
But working with this has been so liberating. And what you wrote in the book about the concept of benevolent stewardship, like that just set off all these like beautiful fireworks in my brain. And I was like, yes, like it's like I see the kings as being the parallel with the emperor, right? There's a sense of mentorship, there's a sense of community care, there's a sense of advocating for the people that you care about, right? And it's so exciting because I co-host the Amherst Peers and Queers, and it's 2S LGBTQIA plus group here in town, and we're in a small town. It's like 10,000 people in and around. Apparently, has been for the last 100 years. Like there's like no real population like increase or decrease, and like it's uber conservative when it comes to voting. Like it's all these conservative lawn signs and ridiculousness. And yet there's this thriving queer community here too, which is so amazing. So we started up the group when we play board games every Friday. We had this massive potluck last Friday, and it was wonderful. But I put out a little like, oh yeah, I read tarot and I'd love to do some readings for people moving into the new year. And there's some trans folks there, non-binary folks, and it's so lovely to have this deck to work with so that when I do a reading for someone, I'm using something that represents their experience, right? And can represent and introduce a lot of people who aren't familiar with the tarot to something in an accessible and really beautiful way. And so cards like this, right? Like that is so powerful to be able to show that to someone. And if it's their first exposure to tarot, how magical is that, right? Like to be able to show something that it's like, yeah, that is my experience, or that reflects an aspect of my experience, right? And that's just so amazing. So thank you for that.
Yeah. The first time that I think that I hadn't even finished creating the deck yet, but I was with a group of friends at a friend's house and showed this emperor image to like the table of friends there. Or maybe I pulled some cards, or that maybe I had the deck all created. I can't remember, but it was one of my friends' first time seeing this card. And I remember that she looked at it and she was like, oh, look at that handsome guy. And then she goes, wait, or is it? And I was like, yes,
my job is done.
That is exactly what I wanted, as I wanted you to question things and think about things, you know, and then because she was like, wait, oh, and I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Little happy dance over here.
Oh, that's incredible. And what a great introduction to the emperor. Like if that's your first introduction to it, how powerful is that? Rather than this kind of patriarchal, domineering, manipulative character that shows up in so many decks. If you're going with a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith, Tarot de Marseille, like any of it, it's this very kind of patriarchal, dominating figure. It was true with the Hierophant as well. And those are the two cards that I really found tricky for a really long time. And I love that you have the other deck that I noticed had some minor changes was the Hierophant, right? Because isn't it the librarian at the Library of Congress that is represented? Yeah.
Yeah. In the indie deck, it's Carla Hayden, who's the Librarian of Congress. Yeah. But for the same reasons, I had to I had to change the image. But it's still like obviously a librarian, and librarian like is the Hierophant vibe to me. It's not about orthodoxy. It's not about like sort of rigid tradition requirements. It's about all of the knowledge of the ages, of our ancestors, of people that came before us and like learned stuff, figured stuff out and left it for us in books. It's about all of like the knowledge and information that's out there and how we can engage with it and learn with it in supportive ways that prioritize critical thinking, independent thought. You know, just because something is traditional doesn't mean that it's bad. It also doesn't mean that it's good, right? But I think that was the thing with the Hierophant for me that really flipped it, because I too struggled with the Hierophant because of organized religion, you know, because of the traditional Pope representation in most decks. But even that, religion, not necessarily a bad thing, but when you take like orthodox, you know, some compulsory sense, then it's not a bad thing. So, and I like that about tarot as well, because just like we were talking about there, it confronts us with things and makes us, you know, so I think that like I'm a better person and a person who knows more about myself and about the world today because of having to confront these various things through tarot and unpack, you know, all the stuff about, you know, masculinity and femininity and tradition and institution and white supremacy, which shows up in the card as well. Having to things and unpack them, and then create them anew. Like I think that when we work with tarot, we are always in our own process of sort of queering the card. If you know, take queering to mean making, sort of subverting, deconstructing, making things our own. You know?
And I think you kind of have to understand what the original archetype was back in the way back in the day when it first came out, in order to be able to revise and revamp and reconstruct it for yourself, right? Like I love to cook, and I used to have a food blog, and I've done all kinds of training, and I always kind of, now I can't help but tinker with recipes, but I always force myself that first time I go through to do it as it's written, so that I understand the original intention, the original structure, and then I just go wild and I change it and I do all kinds of other things. And it's really exciting to be able to do that. But I feel like that original structure, as devastating and frustrating, as anger provoking as it can be, is almost a necessary first step in that revamp process, right? And also, like you said, coming to terms with, okay, why is it I feel so triggered by the emperor? What is it about my experience or about myself that I'm resisting, or that I need to push back against in healthier ways, or in ways that are serving me as I'm showing up in the world right now, right? And I love that so much, because, yeah, I mean, those cards do provoke a lot of response, even in the original kind of structure and deck. And I feel like there's a lot of gatekeeping around meaning for tarot as well. And I love, like Nick from In Search of Tarot is really pushing back against that. And I love that so much, because what's saying that we can't see these things in new ways? Like, the tarot police come in and tell us we're supposed to only do it this way because people way back hundreds of years ago did it that way. Well, no, we're not living hundreds of years ago now, right? The environment.
And those people that did it hundreds of years ago, Jules,
I know, right?
completely made it
It was a
up.
card
Like,
game. It was a card game. Like, and I say that to people too, like, because it's so funny, because I brought in, like, I have this metaphysical take on Cards Against Humanity. It's called Love, Light, Go Fuck Yourself, and it's hilarious and it's great. But I brought it in for a Peers and Queers group, and like a lot of the references were like esoteric, and people were like, who is this? And I'm like bringing up Google. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the context. But there was this one thing, and I can't remember what it was, but it was my round. And one of the people there put in the Satan, and the answer was Satan. And I can't even remember what the query was. And it was just hilarious in context. And that's the one I picked. And they're like, oh, yeah, I thought you'd like that one. And I was like, because I read tarot? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, okay, your idea of what I'm doing with tarot and my idea of what I'm doing with tarot are two very different things. Like, this is a piece of cardboard, essentially. It has the meaning we prescribe it, but it doesn't have any innate power in and of itself to do pretty much anything. Like anything in life, things have power if you give them power. But like, essentially, yeah, it was just so funny to me, because I was just like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to recalibrate this in my brain, because it's like the word is very charged, right? And like it means different things to different people, and like, yeah.
And we choose the meaning that we ascribe to it too. So like, returning to the kings and thinking about the kings in terms of stewards and stewardship instead of in terms of like rulership or kingship, is a reframe, and then changes the meaning that we are giving it. And there's so much power in that, because you're exactly right. Like things like tarot cards, things like archetypes, as much as archetypes are anything, I think of archetypes as like our group think around what a certain thing is, rather than primordial image, like Jung and Joseph Campbell style. They only have the power that we give them. They only mean what we decide they mean, So, and I actually do in Radical Tarot, I offer renamings for the court cards. And so the kings, I do all the stewards. I did sages, the knights are seekers, and the pages are students. And then I actually, for each of the court cards, further give them each a name. So like the page of well, now I'm not gonna be able to
no, but I love that process of reinventing it. Like, I have some decks where the names of the court cards are changed, or some of the major arcana has been shifted. Like, that's true in the Outsider Tarot. I think it's true in Numinous Tarot, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's so refreshing to see that, because it invites you to look at the cards in new ways. And I love guidebooks. I love tarot books. Like, I have my Mercury and Sun in Gemini, and I'm constantly seeking out new information, right? And part of it is I want to look at things in new ways. Like, okay, I've worked with this in this capacity for so long, but how can I look at it a little bit differently? And how is that going to open up my practice? Like, I love picking up a tarot book, and I'll read like a single sentence about a card, And I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't think about it that way. And now it's shifted my entire practice or my entire focus around this. A simple little sentence, right? But there's so much power in that. And anything that allows this practice to be more expansive and more inclusive, like you never know what phrase or what terminology is going to open something up for someone, right? And that is so magical. And I'm so, oh, I can't wait to read your book. Like, I'm so excited because I just like, I love unpacking all of this stuff. And it's so exciting to look at this practice. How can we expand it? How can we include more rather than less, right? It feels so often like things are closing in and things are getting more restrictive. And, you know, I mean, politics is a shit show here in Canada as well as the US. And it's just like, okay, well, how can we move away from that in our day-to-day practices? How can we open things up rather than restrict them? How can we include? How can we expand, right? Like, there's so much magic in that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So tell me more about the book and like the structure and like what your process was for approaching everything that you're writing about.
Oh man. Um, what was my process? My process was just like sit down and do it. I wrote a
Yeah.
very ambitious outline. Um, and now I'm probably gonna, I couldn't put everything that I wanted to put in the book in this book. So I have material for future
Exciting.
books. Um, but I'd go into like, I do a really deep dive on
Mhm.
each one of the major arcana cards. And because I too find knowing the history of the
Yeah.
cards to be very liberating, because when we dig into the history of tarot, we find that
Yep.
it was all made up to begin with. Like, um, you know, first it was a card game, which did not have a set number of cards. Like there were different
Mhm.
numbers of cards in early tarot decks. None of them were
Mhm.
numbered. None of them were named. So when like we get really rigid about
Mhm.
the system itself, the numbering, the
Mhm.
naming, card goes
Yeah.
where, is justice 8 or 11, you know, it was all sort of like made up to begin with. And then the occultists that then turned it, or maybe not turned it, but um, made it
Mhm.
popular as a divinatory or a magical tool, also just cleared fantastically made
Yeah.
stuff. Just imaginatorium their
Yeah.
own idea of where tarot came from,
Mhm.
and what it meant. It has always been this artifact where humans have looked at these
Yeah.
cards and then seen stuff in them that
Yeah.
was not necessarily there, but at the same time could be
Mhm.
so informative, so liberating,
Mhm.
useful, affirming. You know, it's
Yeah.
whatever we want with it. Really. And so when I look back at the history of the cards, I find that just like frees, it's been an
Yeah.
artifact of free association and a
Yeah.
very beginning, right? So like we can still keep doing that now. We can make as many new tarots, as many new
Yeah.
systems within it. Like, you
Yeah.
know, it can be whatever. And so I really try to like liberate that idea and like give people the framework to do their own exploration of what the hell
Yeah.
else tarot can mean besides that. And then in each of the cards that I go into, like the major arcana cards, in a lot of them I do give some of that like deep background as a jumping off point, into sort of queering the cards, radicalizing them, looking at them for what they could mean for creating better, more radical futures. So for with the High Priestess,
Mhm.
which I love, I'm fascinated with the High Priestess and that card's history. So like I looked back at
Mhm.
Pope Joan as a possible inspiration. Um, I looked at
Mhm.
the Guglielmites, which was a radical Christian sect, as a possible inspiration. And these are things
Yeah.
that tarot scholars have written
Yeah.
about. They all have also read about, you know, some tarot scholars say, no, it
Yeah.
definitely wasn't Pope Joan. It definitely wasn't Manfreda Visconti of, you know, the
Yeah.
Popus of the Guglielmites. But if we look at those things, like Pope Joan and this other Visconti ancestor who was the popist, the female pope of a heretical Christian sect, we find in that really cool inspiration for what this card means in our future. So what is heresy? It is choosing what you believe in the face of compulsory belief, in the face of punishment, in the face, you know, doing that deep work to know what you believe and what you are devoted to and dedicated to. And so it takes in those meanings of the high priestess that are like intuition, mystery, introspection, depth work, you know, but also looks to some of that history of heresy in order to create some cool radical contexts for what art could mean now, what it could mean for the future, you know. So that's just one example, basically out a huge amount on these cards, deconstruct them a lot, and just get fun and I hope creative with what they could mean now. And there will be some things in there that like probably some definitions that don't appeal to everybody. But that's part of the point, is opening up these doors for questioning what these cards
Absolutely. And nothing's
know.
ever going to appeal to every single person. And like we were talking about earlier, having those things that you butt up against and force you to question the things that maybe you've always believed or always associated with something is so important, because it opens you up to new possibilities in how you navigate the world, how you navigate yourself, right? And I love that idea of the high priestess as the ultimate heretic, right? You're like pushing back against established tradition and being like, no, this is what I know to be true based on my intuition, based on my lived experience. And that is so incredibly powerful, right? And like scholarship is all well and good, but who's to say for sure what the inspiration was hundreds of years ago? So why not use that person as a beacon of inspiration now? Like, what is it about them that lights you up? What is it about them that inspires you? Maybe it wasn't, technically speaking, there isn't enough evidence to say like, oh yes, absolutely, it was Pope Joan. But why not use Pope Joan as inspiration, right? Like, there's nothing saying that you couldn't, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And like I'm really inspired by, I bring a lot of like queer theory into this, and I'm really inspired by Jose Esteban Munoz has this idea of queer evidence, which is sort of like listening between the cracks of things. So what we think we know about what tarot is, or where it came from, or what the cards are based on, these things we only know because they have been written about, they've been preserved. What kind of stuff is usually preserved? What kind of knowledge is usually preserved? It's usually the status quo's knowledge. It's usually the narrative that supports the powers that be. It's you know, it's not necessarily the whole picture. It's absolutely, I will say, it's not the whole picture, period, ever. And so like listening to Munoz says like the whispers, or the trace, like I can't remember exactly how he puts it, but I'm just so inspired by that idea, which is a huge part of Radical Tarot, the book, but also of how I think about tarot in general, how I think about life and knowledge. So yeah, it definitely takes that and follows those whispers.
The whole concept of reading between the lines and looking for what wasn't being represented, why wasn't it being represented, and how is it showing up? Because those things have always been there, right? Just because they weren't written down and made a part of history, which was, let's face it, written by scholars and elderly, privileged, and very rich white men, by and large. So what was it that was happening behind the scenes, or, you know, in the subculture? Because there's always been subculture, right? Like even my kids, like we explore a lot of queer theory and a lot of different things in our homeschooling, and it's like that question of like, my girls always joke, they were roommates, right? Like, it's not that it wasn't there. It was very much there, but it was just kind of like hidden in plain sight sometimes, right? Or it was part of something that maybe looked one way but was very different under the surface, right? And allowed people to live more freely in their day-to-day lives in a way that, you know, most people didn't understand, but was very much present, right? I mean, yeah, it's so exciting to do that work and investigate and see, you know, my master's thesis, I wrote about a salonier in Paris from the teens to the 1930s, like pre-war era. And Natalie Clifford Barney created the salon space, and she brought in all of these people, artists living on the West Bank, and, you know, Sylvia Beach from the Little Shakespeare Company bookstore, and or Shakespeare Company bookstore, and like all of these different people. And so I looked at a lot of liminal theory and queer theory and everything else, and it's so fascinating to see how vibrant these communities were and how present they were for each other and how supportive they were. And it's not something that maybe everyone was aware of, but it was there and it was vibrant and it was alive, and it's so magical to see that history, right? That we're not taught in school. Well, I was like, I focused on it as my master's thesis, but like, it's not mainstream. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean that just because it wasn't part of mainstream knowledge that it wasn't there and it wasn't vibrant and it wasn't supportive and sacred and magical, right? Like, it's, yeah.
I think of something that's like that's done and decided and like set in stone, but the past is so much more malleable than that. Like, present creates the past, the future creates the past. You know, this your arrow of time situation is really just like a very, very narrow view of the picture. And I think that in a metaphysical way, when we do some of this work of looking back at the past, looking at these cards, like thinking about archetype in the tarot, you know, and we deconstruct them, we queer them, we listen to them, trace evidence, and follow where it might lead. Like, our in a metaphysical way, creating the past and the future at the same time.
Like a lineage for ourselves that maybe didn't exist prior, right? You're finding those threads of knowledge, those threads of experience that help inform us today, walking through the world as queer people. I feel like this is something that I just recently understood about myself, and it's so exciting to see. Despite the fact that I always surrounded myself in queer theory and queer people and queer spaces, it was like, oh, that's not me, that's something else. And then last summer, it's like, no, it's 100% me. But like, it's so exciting to reach that realization point. And actually, my Numinous Tarot deck arrived that morning that I had this great realization, and it was just so magical. And I'll always be so appreciative of that deck just because it, like, the serendipity of it, right? But like, now looking back and seeing that there is this vibrant, rich history to draw from, you know, like, it may not be your genetic legacy, but it's still your legacy, right? Of lived experience of being present in the world, right? And it's so important, right? And so magical. And I love that so much. So were there any cards in the major arcana that you struggled with in this process of unpacking the cards? Yeah.
For the book, I mean, definitely. I think I in some way struggled with every single card because I was really pushing myself to be radical about it. You know, myself to try to not just regurgitate what has been said about the cards before, and really sort of like take a radical approach, sort of a slantwise lens at each of these cards. And so I wrestled with each of them, but which one would be the most,
or the most exciting? Like, doesn't have to be challenging necessarily, but like, the High Priestess, definitely. That's like, I love what you said about that. And like,
I had a field day with that card. That was great. I think, and I also like, I learned so much about tarot myself through writing this book, as happens, as one does when one writes a book about something. But I think that the biggest sort of like key cards for this book that felt like sort of guardians of the book, or like guides of the book the whole way through, were the Fool, the Tower,
Not
and the
that.
Empress. Three of the cards that just like um,
Yeah.
really just sort of like fell out of me. I think that those three cards together also sort of like spell kind of a story of the book as well. It's like it's foolish enough, perhaps naive enough to take a radical approach to imagine that we might be able to
Yeah.
create better futures for ourselves. Other with tarot, that chapter, you know, brings in some of my ideas about creating the future in it. And then the
Yes.
Tower is, you know, destroying what we thought we knew. And also, like, the Tower has been a huge card for me, and I think for all of us probably for the last several years, but in a beautiful way, has taught me about, like, I don't know, being present through shit happening, and that like bad things will always happen. And one of the things that this book also does is try to,
Yeah.
it is not a love and light book. It is a book that I hope challenges people to think about their
Yeah.
assumptions, their
Mhm.
biases, and really face them. And I think that that is
Oh, huge.
big Tower work.
Yeah.
It's work, but definitely big Tower work there. And to like be able to love ourselves and support ourselves even
Yeah.
as we do this huge important inner work. And so then
Yeah.
we have the Empress that 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 force of like boldly
Yeah.
feeling our emotions, allowing our feel to inform us, to help us know ourselves better. I was really inspired by Audre
Mhm.
Lorde's uses of the erotic for the first card. Um, uh, I have had this idea of like doing like a, I don't know, like a book club or like a reading club or like a podcast series where I like assign reading
Yeah.
for each one of the major arcana cards, because in each card through like writing this book, there was like at least one essay or book or speech
Love
or
that so
something
much.
that
Yeah.
I kept going inspiration, and felt like very much that card. But anyway, that's a tangent. So I think that those three cards, and like the Empress also being a very like, I think the Empress has a lot of the sort of energy and mindset
Yeah.
that we need to confront patriarchy,
Mhm.
hierarchy, white supremacy, etc. Um, because it embodies some of the things that we've been told not to
Yes.
trust for so
Absolutely.
long, um, including including emotion, including um, connection,
Mhm.
empathy, um,
Yeah.
mercy, our body, like it, like the Empress for me has become kind of like a powerhouse of um like anti-capitalistic, like anti-racist,
Yeah.
anti-patriarchy, just in a hugely beautiful embodied, um like, I would like to say self-loving, but I don't think that we can always,
Yeah.
it's hard to be self-loving all the
Yes.
time. So just self-compassionate
Absolutely. Yeah.
way.
Oh, I love that
Yeah.
so much. Yeah. As you know, Siri and Cassandra Clare had come up with the lessons from the Empress, and it was fascinating for me viewing the entire tarot through that archetype. Siri Samuelson Pluff and Cassandra Clare, they did such a beautiful job of unpacking the entire 78 cards from that perspective of compassion and empathy and nurturance and creativity. Like I personally can't think of anything more radical than the process of creation and putting something out in the world, right? Creating words, creating music, creating art in a world that doesn't necessarily support that. I can't think of anything more radical than that. And also loving and supporting yourself through that journey of being open and being vulnerable, right? Like there's this whole misnomer around strength being, you know, I'm going to go it alone, you know, every man is an island and you just have to stiff upper lip, all that toxic masculinity bullshit, right? So the whole process of like moving past that and allowing that vulnerable self to emerge from that shell, right? That there's so much power in that, right? And that's such an empress kind of way of looking at it, right? And it's so powerful. I love that so much.
And it was I think you were saying
Oh
Cassandra,
my God, no.
Cassandra
Cassandra
Clare, but
Snow.
your
Oh my
name's
gosh. I'm so sorry.
okay.
Cassandra Clare's an author who does like
Books. I
angst-ridden
knew I kept
YA
waiting.
stuff that I can't wrap my head around anymore. Cassandra
I
Snow. Oh my gosh, Cassandra, if you ever see this, I'm so sorry. Oh my God.
Waiting Charlie Clare and Cassandra Snow, in which case I am highly
Oh,
flattered.
I'm so embarrassed. Oh my goodness. I know it's Cassandra Snow. My goodness. Anyway, I'm just, yeah, shake it off. Anyway, yes, Cassandra Snow.
Of
Yeah.
all the book, of all the that came out too late for me to read them and put them in the book, that their book, Lessons on the Empress or Lessons for the Empress, I
Yeah.
have it on my shelf back here somewhere, is that I wish
Yeah.
had come out in time for me to be able to like devour, digest it, and then
Yeah.
like, you know, bring it
Yeah.
in, just like
Yeah.
cite the shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And querying the tarot
So
and querying your craft as well. Like, oh, it's just like huge shifts in mindset and perspectives on tarot and witchcraft and practicing all of these wonderful magics, right? Because it really is a form of magic and it's really powerful and yeah, really, really special. Oh, that's amazing. And you also have a couple of other decks in the works, right? The Game Marseille, which I cannot wait for. Most of the decks that I've worked with, not all, have been RWS inspired, and so I'm really excited to unpack the Tarot de Marseille. And because there's your deck is coming out, and then also Krista Flute from Anti-K's Tarot, she's working on one, and then also Carrie Snook from Bouchette Design Shop. So I'm really excited that all of these releases are coming out because there's this like whole new world of tarot to explore. So what has the process been like in creating that? I've loved all of the shares that you've put out of all of the designs and the inspiration behind them. It's been really exciting.
yeah, I'm really excited about it. That deck started, originally it started because I was gonna like maybe do
Oh,
illustrations for
cool.
Radical Tarot. And now it's gonna be Fifth Spirit Tarot Images and Radical Tarot. But it started at that point because I was, bringing in all this history of the cards, and so I was like, I want to like, create some illustrations to maybe like illustrate those cards for the book. Um, uh, and instead
Yeah.
it just became its own deck. Because I was looking at those, and then I started, playing
Mhm.
with the imagery, querying those a bit. And it's been so much fun. I'm such an Aquarius,
Mhm.
so I love systems and specifically love
Mhm.
disrupting systems. I love learning
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
ruining them. And so, like, I think that's one of the reasons that I love tarot and the way that I do in general. But it's a lot of fun and also just a fun challenge for me to
Mhm.
take the Marseille cards and find ways within them to, change the
Mhm.
imagery slightly in order to open them up, in order to queer them or trouble them in some way, or
Yeah.
sometimes just kind of
Yeah.
cheeky and fun with them. Um, so like, because I feel like the Game Marseille is a deck that is
Yeah.
very just like
Yeah.
cheeky at heart. Like that is a spirit for me. So like with the lovers, for instance. So the lovers in Marseille decks, the perhaps most popular, most well-known images of the lovers card, because there are different designs even within Marseille decks. But the most popular one has what is either a man
Mm-hmm.
choosing between two women, or sometimes interpreted as a man choosing between his mother and
Yeah.
his love interest. And like, whatever way we cut it, like that card, that's
No,
just kind of
no, not at
gross. Like, we don't
all.
like that.
Ugh.
And so, instead, I took that and I made those three people on that card be just like a little, like
I
a
love
little
that.
poly couple, like a little like um and like I put like fishnets on one of them, and like put like I think I've got like a middle finger
Oh,
like back patch on
yeah,
like one of their or something. So just finding fun
yeah,
ways just
yeah.
to like fuck with the cards and you know make them fun and relevant, and also
Yeah.
affirming, um, uh, and to just, I don't know. I feel like that's a deck that wants to
Yeah.
just like have a
Oh
good
my gosh,
time,
love that.
like with inner.
Yeah, inappropriate fun and like joy is the best way to learn. Like honestly, like my kids are learning world history and sometimes we'll watch horrible histories and it's like gross out humor and it's ridiculous and like over the top. But it's amazing what they retain from that because it's fun and they're laughing and they're enjoying the process. And like if you can't do that when you're learning, then like not what's the point, but kind of. Do you know what I mean? Like the process of like pushing back against stuff and making light of it, like I know that's kind of probably some people would say like it's blasphemous or heretical to like, take it apart and challenge. Why not? Like, please, yes, please, let's do that because, if you can't have fun with it, then what's the point? Honestly, like, yeah, I love that. I love that so much. So how many of the cards have you worked on so far for that one?
That one has been coming along slower just because I had
Yeah,
to
both
write a
wrote a
book
book,
this
re-released a
past year.
deck, like, just little things,
Yeah, I
Oh my
I
gosh, yeah.
moved. Uh, yeah, recreated a deck, wrote a
Yeah.
book, got
And
top certified.
congratulations,
It's
by
been
the
a
way.
good
That's so
year.
phenomenal. Yeah.
It's been a good year. It's been a good year. Um, so it's been going along slower, but now
Yeah.
as my time is freeing up more, I'm getting to spend more time with it, create more cards. I
Oh,
almost the entire major arcana done, and I'm starting on the minor arcana for the Game Marseille now. And that is also presenting a fun challenge for me because I really I want to with this deck, stick visibly to
mhm.
like the Game
Yeah.
Marseille pattern. So I don't want to like change it so much that it's not irreconcilable,
Mhm.
unrecognizable. Jeez. um, but but I don't want to just like, I don't know, do the Marseille
Yeah.
pips, but with like a different color palette. I'm finding little ways to do, um, to bring in some like fun things there. So like, like I've got, I wish that I had a Marseille deck or my iPad beside me so I could show you this, but on
Yeah.
the Ace of Pentacles, for instance, it's a big coin in the middle, and then like some flowery flourishes. Um, Instead of like flower buds, I've got
Ooh.
like pairs of lips, and
Yeah.
in the coin in the middle, excuse me, it's
I love that.
leopard print. Um, like, and then I've got some like little
Oh,
lipsticks in there,
yeah.
like just fun little, just like, and hopefully to bring in
Yeah.
some visual cues, um, to sort of hold on to in interpretation, because decks can
Yeah.
be challenging to read with if you
Yeah.
don't have memorized. Um, so that's my fun challenge that I'm doing right now,
Yeah.
is figuring out how to do
Oh,
that with
I love
Marseille's.
that so much.
Um,
That's so fun. Yeah, I have John Benjamin Tarot, well, Ben Jolivet's books on tarot, and he writes all about the Tarot de Marseille and looks at like different numerology and like cross references, so that 10 times fast all the different suits, and like it's really fascinating because it's yet another way of approaching the tarot, right? And like looking at, okay, well, it's not just this one suit and the progression through the suit, but what are the through lines across suits and how do they relate to each other, and like looking at like the fours as foundations. Okay, well that's a very different way of looking at it, and like how can you reinvent the Three of Swords if you're looking at it from a numerological perspective as opposed to the angst-ridden, spear-driven heart that's in, RWS. And so it's fascinating to look at those things and bringing in some leopard print and lipstick levity. Like I'm all for it. That sounds fantastic. Like it's so lovely to re-envision things in new ways. That's super exciting. And I didn't need to put any pressure on you by asking like how many cards have you finished, because it's like not about that at all. It's just so exciting to think about it.
It's my next it's my next project that I'm going to finish. So it's like the next thing on the roster. And then I've also got my playing card oracle deck that I'm excited
that's
to
the Aquarius Rising Oracle is a working title, right? Yeah.
Working
title,
yeah. And that one is taking it's based on a regular deck of playing cards, but organized. And in that one, I am playing with numerology and suit in order to sort of the cards, create the oracle design. So just absolutely to what you just said about all of that.
Oh, that's exciting. Thomas from the Hermit's Mirror, he has the Lifeline and the playing card deck, and it's the Lenormand, which is kind of part Lenormand, part playing card, and it's been really fascinating to look at some of those, like to play with that numerology a little bit more and look at. I always get turned around because for whatever reason I feel like the club should be pentacles and diamonds should be wands, but it's the reverse. I don't know why, because clubs are obviously sticks and diamonds are obviously like coinage. So like,
but the clubs look like a clover. So I could see that going earth.
Funny how you get these mindsets about things, right? Because it makes no sense if I like look at it rationally, but like the more I work with it, the more I ease into this. Like, okay, well, this is a different way of looking at it, so I need to reset that for my brain. And it's interesting how there's like 3 of the court cards rather than 4, and like just looking at kind of different systems and structures, and it's really great because it's like that process again of like rewiring your brain. Okay, I'm going to broach this system which has some parallels, but see it in a different way. And so how does this new understanding, how can I bring that back to my tarot practice and kind of re-envision this from a new perspective? So it's really exciting. And I love all the cards that you've shared from the Oracle deck as well. Like it's been really exciting to see them come to life and see how you're, re-envisioning all of that. It's really exciting.
Yeah, thanks. The thing I'm excited the most about that one is literally just that I can play card games with it. I mean, you can do that with the tarot deck too, but that like it'll be, I mean, the idea is that it'll be like the size of a card deck as well, although it might end up oversized. That's not decided. But my partner and I love, like we carry a card deck around with us all the time and just play in public places or waiting, and we have had so many older people come up to us in public places and be like, y'all are
I love that so much.
Young people play cards anymore.
I love that so much. Yeah, I love I grew up playing a lot of gin rummy with my grandparents and crib as well. Those are the big ones. And Dominic won't play cards with me because he says that I make up the rules, but like he didn't grow up playing crib or anything, so it's like something new that I introduced him to, I think. And like we'll be playing and then I'll remember a rule because it relates to like my particular hand, and like that's not my fault. And then he'll be like, no, and I'm like, well, but you like we can play and you can look up the rules and like tell me if you want, and like that's fine. And I'm trying to work on it with my kids too, because I figure it's really good math multiplication skills, right? And good fives and like addition and multiplication and all that. So I'm working on that with my son, and it's kind of, but like cards are so much fun, and it's the best thing when you're just like randomly somewhere to be able to pull out a card deck and just like have a quick game. What are your favorites to play?
Yeah. Oh, we play gin rummy. That's what we play too. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
that's the only one we play because we don't know the rules.
Yeah, I love to do like
So
bridge, and like I know like my grandma was one of 16 kids, and so there was always tons of aunts around. And like I remember one time when I was a kid sitting at the card table, and it was like my grandmother and my aunt. And because it was a family of 16, there was constant volume, right? So like I think three aunts were at the table at the time, and they were all carrying on separate conversations, but somehow keeping up. And I just remember looking up, and my two great uncles just looked at each other, turned off their hearing aids, and then went back to the game. And it was just hilarious. And I have no idea how they're able to keep up with these like three very separate conversations. But they were, I think, playing bridge at the time, and I would love to figure that out. But like, I just need to sit down and like work it out and figure out like, okay, what do I need to do? Because like crib, I know backwards and forward. Well, apparently there's some rules that I'm like reintroducing, but essentially like I understand the concept of the game, and like gin rummy too, right? And like so that's fine, it's like more intuitive almost, right? But like there's this whole other world of like card games that would be really fun to kind of unpack and explore. Yeah.
tarot,
Yeah.
the game of tarot is the next frontier that like Aaron and I have
Yeah.
talked about actually learning how to play. I
Oh,
found the rules to it in online, and then in one of the books that I have,
oh,
and it's played somewhat like
interesting.
bridge. So yeah, the next thing I want to do is to
Yeah.
learn how to do that. It was researched in the creation of this book as well. The rules for how to play the game of tarot
Yeah.
are not in this book, but I make references occasionally to
It's
the
so cool.
gameplay. And there's no
Yeah.
reason why we can't learn how to play tarot. tarot. I don't know if it's tarocchi or tarocchi. I don't speak
Yeah.
Italian, so I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Oh
But
my goodness.
we could
If
learn.
you
I'm
ever
just
hold a
saying,
workshop for
like,
that, I will be the first one signing up because that is so exciting. I feel like Mr. Rogers is like one cornerstone of childhood nostalgia, and then like card games are the other. So that would just be like, oh, I
yeah,
would be so excited. Like it's so nice when you can find these ways of like incorporating childhood nostalgia in like a really healthy and functional way that sparks joy like that, right? Like and using your deck to play, and like having all these beautiful illustrations and like connection to tarot that's like being introduced into this game system. Like, that's so exciting. Oh, that's amazing. Very, very.
bringing it.
That's amazing. So which cards have you enjoyed working on most in the Oracle deck?
I'm having a field day with the court
Yeah.
cards, the face cards, because the the technical challenge with those is that I'm doing them like traditional playing cards, where it's kind of got that like
Ooh, yeah.
symmetrical design. Once again, I don't know why I don't have my iPad so I can show you a card, but like that was just like a technical challenge
Mhm.
for me to figure out how to do to make like a
Mhm.
symmetrical image that look like just like cut on the diagonal and then flipped
Yeah.
over. So there's some like elements in there that, you know, with that line. Um, and because in the Oracle deck with those face cards, I'm doing something. So my renaming of the court
Mhm.
cards in Radical Tarot kind of started part of the Oracle deck, where I was like calling like one of the court
Yeah.
cards the artist, and
Mhm.
another one Oracle, and one the lover,
Yeah.
and so finding those names, and then I can't help but like start. I've got like a whole like map in my mind of how each one of the 52
Yeah.
cards in a playing card deck correspond to different cards in the tarot, including
Oh, I love
major
that.
arcana cards. So like mapping the
Yeah.
78 tarot cards to
Yeah.
52 uh, playing cards. Uh,
Fantastic.
I feel like a mad scientist. I'm not sure how much of that is actually going to make it into the Oracle or to the guidebook, but
Yeah,
that's what's going on in
and
the
that I feel like even if it
background.
doesn't technically make it into the book, it's still infusing meaning into the cards, right? The fact that you've drawn that correlation between major and minor arcana. I find that really fascinating sometimes to look at, like, ask the question, okay, so I've got the Lover's card. So what would be the association of minor arcana? Often I pull like the Two of Cups for that, right? And it's like, okay, this connection and relationship. Well, not just relationship with the other, but relationship with the self, and like the nurturance of love, and like evolution of connection, and like, yeah, and there's so many really interesting parallels to draw with that, and I find that super interesting. So like whether it ends up in the book or the deck or not, it's still infusing meaning into what you're creating, which is so awesome. That's really, really cool. Oh, I love that. I just realized that I've kept you like way over time. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. This is incredible.
Anything when I'm talking with you,
Oh my
Jules.
gosh. Well, and I wanted to mention to the folks tuning into where to find you. You have a phenomenal Patreon, which I've been a member of for ages, and I love the content that you have there. Your fabulous website, which is thewordwitchtarot.com, right? And you're actually, I wanted to ask you about this. You're judging a friction writing contest with a deadline April 27th, right? Tell me more.
I can't remember if it's the 17th or the 27th of April. So
Yeah,
I
sometime in
would double check
April.
that.
I've
But
written down the 27th, but that's no guarantee. But yes, folks, please do check that out. But that's very exciting. So tell me more about that.
Oh my God, I feel so cool that I feel like I have too much power, and I'm like, ooh. Yeah, it's just a really great magazine and nonprofit. Have a like they do things like teach creative writing in prisons, and they also did
Yes, I can't wait for that. I had ordered the deck, and then I ordered afterwards the actual physical guidebook, because I was like, I need to see these illustrations and go into depth, and like so many incredible authors, yourself included, are part of that project, and I cannot wait. I'm a lifelong bookworm. I've had my nose in a book since I could learn to read, even before that, and just the whole concept of that being translated into the tarot, like, yes, please, that is so exciting. Oh my goodness. And I knew that they were associated with that. Yes, yes.
Soon.
Yeah.
Arriving soon. So excited for that. And I have a creative nonfiction piece in their issue of their magazine that's about to come out as well, about actually how I rediscovered tarot as an adult. That's what it's in their Arcana issue, which is the issue that was also part of that Kickstarter. So some of the people also got the literary magazine as part of the Kickstarter will be getting that issue as well. But you can also order it, pre-order it right now. It's arriving on the same boat as the decks, I think. So those should be coming out around the same time. But yeah, so Friction also does these great writing contests, and they had the categories are fiction, flash fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction, I'm pretty sure. And they asked if I would judge the creative nonfiction contest, and I'm so excited. One of the things that I really like about Friction is also that they take a very sort of like non-traditional approach to the kind of work that they are interested in and that they like to publish. So like stuff that like blurs genres and sort of breaks boundaries, and that is experimental or weird, like all sorts of kinds of stuff are accepted and prized.
There needs to be more space for that, and I love that they facilitate that. Yeah, I'll be, right after we get off of this, I'm going to be looking into that Arcana issue, because that sounds incredible. I love the idea. Like, how often do the issues come out? Is it quarterly?
It's not quarterly. I can't remember how often they're supposed to come out, but part of what has happened recently was some supply chain stuff, and so that's messed all over the publishing industry at large. I think that be twice a year, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
That's exciting about the writing competition. It's like, oh my goodness.
They're really, like, they are like, well, like they're the kind of magazines that like you keep as books. Like they're very high quality publications. So,
no, that's incredible. I will definitely be looking into that because yeah, I love being able to go back and reference things that are, well written and aesthetically beautiful. And like, yeah, I'm trying to like be conscious of accumulation, but at the same time, I have so many treasured books that like we did a full-time RV travel with our kids, so I digitized most of my book collection. And sometimes, like it's easier to find a digital version or more cost effective or whatever else, but I have this whole like collection of physical books and it makes me so happy. It's all tarot and astrology related really at this point.
Do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
see what
exactly. I've got like this like bookshelf we've got this walk-in closet that I think at one point was like a nursery bedroom or something. So, I've got enough room for my tarot space and everything. But like being able to actually hold something in your hands and be able to cross-reference properly and like there's something so exciting about that. And like, yeah, I'm very excited about this magazine. That's really, really great. And you also teach classes. Was it Sea Grape Apothecary that you had one last month? Yeah.
Yeah, I teach with Secret often, and I'm going to be teaching a couple more classes with them this year. All my classes for 2023 are still being finalized, but I'm probably going to be teaching a class on like queer devotion, queer divinity, hearing gods, myths, and legends, which is going to be so fun. We're just going to nerd out and get weird. And then I'm probably going to be teaching a class on tarot deck creation. That'll be fun. And then I'm looking at also teaching probably a 4-week intro to radical tarot class with another shop here in Portland, but it'll be online, so anybody can go to that. I'm going to be teaching that with Woo PDX, and all the details are still being ironed out for these, but they will be announced when things are all set.
What
and yeah, I'm excited.
Fun way to tie in your book, like with a workshop like that. That is so exciting. It's so fun to like book clubs are kind of hit and miss sometimes in the real world in terms of like I'm reading Women Who Run with the Wolves right now, and like I can't wrap my head around anything that is that gendered anymore. Like I just can't. Like I just want to rip it apart and be like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, why do we have to be women running with the wolves? Why can't we be people that are living our experience? And why does it have to be so gendered? And like, it's the book is really pissing me off. Anyway, sorry. But like a good book club should be something that you can come together in community, explore these ideas, and like, yeah, rip all those things apart and just look at it in terms of like everything that you said about your book, like taking everything apart and exploring it in new ways and like challenging pre-established beliefs and ideas. Like that is just so exciting. And to be able to do that in community with other folks in celebration of the book is just that's just like those brain fireworks are going off again. Like that is so exciting. It's wonderful. Yeah, so I will definitely be keeping an eye on that. That is such a cool idea. And then you also have your podcast.
I do too many. I have too many things.
You have
Jules.
Gemini in your big three, don't you?
The list.
Like, you have Gemini in your big three, I think. Yeah.
Oh
yeah. I'm Gemini sun, and I totally get that. Like, not to make everything about astrology, but that like diverse interests and constantly seeking out new information thing, like that's definitely a thing. But like your podcast is fantastic, and like that was the first thing, my first introduction to you through the Patreon was all the podcast episodes, and that was so informative and interesting and wonderful. And yeah, so definitely check that out.
We'll be doing so like anybody who has been a listener of the podcast, the Word Witch podcast, knows that it has been on indefinite hiatus for a long time as I've been doing all of these other things. I am planning to come back and do the final episode of the Nines. To finish that up and talk about the and the moon and the nine minor arcana. And then after that, the podcast is kind of like I might be pivoting it into something else, maybe renaming it, maybe
Yeah.
making it like a different structure or doing something else. Like I'm looking at ways to get like more
Mhm.
sustainable
Yeah,
for
that's
me
yourself, right? Because
as I
like
do.
I'm I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, but like I have so many different interests, and it's such a challenge to like, okay, where do I put my energy so I'm not just like running myself in the ground and burning out, because I need to focus my energy in this direction and that direction. But if I try and do all the things, it's that 10 of wands stuff, right? That just like burnout that happens. Yeah. But even the episodes that you've created thus far are fantastic and well worth listening to.
Oh, well, thank you. And I really like that uh, that will exist and continue to exist out there as
Yeah.
like a free sort of um, its own sort of
Mhm.
like intro to
Yeah.
tarot podcast is what. So I'm really happy with
Mhm.
what I created there.
Yeah.
And so
Wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of really amazing information and places to explore, and yeah, it's very, very exciting. And yeah, so is there anything else that you wanted to mention in terms of where folks can find you, or yeah.
No, I mean
Mhm.
that's all the places. I'm not on any of the other social things really. I nominally had a Twitter for a while, but now
Mhm.
I made that thing private and I've given up that. Um, so yeah, just here on Instagram. And my website, thewordwitchtarot.com. Fifth
Mhm.
Spirit Tarot has its own website that you can also go to, fifthtarot.com.
All those amazing
And
merchandise
I've got a newsletter
too, sweatshirts and t-shirts, and there's some Tarot de Marseille cards that are on t-shirts as well, right? Yeah.
on
And
t-shirt. Oh
shoulder
yeah,
bags as well,
I'm
like
looking.
tote bags. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm looking doing offering prints of some of
Oh,
the
nice.
cards as well soon. Um, and um, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again for joining me. This has been an absolute pleasure. I always love chatting with you. It's wonderful. And yes, so everybody definitely check out Fifth Spirit Tarot. Yeah, I just have the top of the box, so it's like ridiculously light. But yeah, this is available everywhere now. It's phenomenal. Definitely check it out. And Radical Tarot, it's coming out next fall, or fall
It's
2023.
coming
Yeah.
fall. Yep, yep. I tentatively September, but I
Yeah.
don't have the
Oh,
final on
that's so
that.
exciting.
So,
I
but
can't
this
wait to
fall,
read
yeah.
it. Yeah, so definitely check that out too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your
Thank
weekend.
you too. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for talking to me again. This was
a pleasure. Yeah,
yeah.
and for anyone who wasn't available to tune in to the entire hour and change, I'll be saving this as well on my IGTV and on my YouTube channel, so you're more than welcome to tune in there. Wonderful. Well,
Yay.
thank you, Jen. Bye.
Thanks.